Thanks, Michael. Thank you, Michael, Tricia, and the rest of the team for inviting us and for making this place the starting of a very important conversation. But I'm here with Wendy, who has really been at the center of internet governance for decades. And there are others in this room who have also been at that center. And it's really amazing and fantastic when they asked me if I would interview and do a fireside with Wendy, that I have the opportunity to sit here with her and really talk about how we should learn from a lot of the work that she's worked on. So from her early days in the Electronic Frontier Foundation, leadership roles at the W3C, she's the founder of the Lumen Project at Berkman, and she's also currently an advisor to the First Person Cooperative, and that was all before breakfast this morning. She is really, when you look at her career and you have the opportunity to speak with her, and hopefully today you will have some time with her, she really works across law, standards, open source, and a very important piece of it, which is the institutional governance of these platforms and systems. And when you say, hey, this person has had a front seat in the development of these standards and these practices, Wendy certainly has, and she's going to share some of that work with us today, which I think is really important. We're here obviously at the Summit of Human Agency, so we're talking about AI systems, and more AI systems are able to mediate identity, help with communications and decision making, but many of the same relevant questions when the internet was being worked on and set up, and the governance of the internet and the principles I think apply, right? Who holds the power, who is accountable for these systems, and how do we design these systems, very importantly, to preserve human agency rather than erode it. Because regardless of our bots and not, we are humans, and we need to make that in core part of what we develop and what we bring to the market. So I like to explore some of the early battles that you've had been in front of around standards, transparency, and governance, and very importantly, what we can share with the attendees here today. So Wendy?
Great, thanks so much, Daniela. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you and thinking about the genesis of new forms and opportunities for governance. I got my start in this around the time that the internet was being transformed from a set of government-controlled networks to public-private partnerships to something where individuals could really attach and build their own roads into cyberspace, as we were thinking about it at the time. The internet superhighway would have its connections into individual neighborhoods and communities. And I want to take some lessons from the construction of ICANN, which, if any of you has been involved with ICANN, probably elicits some groans and, how can we think that this Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers is a positive to look up to, rather than, ugh, do I have to get engaged in yet another layer of policy? But one of the genius ideas behind that was the multi-stakeholder governance. So, that when the U.S. government in its better days, was handing over control of the domain name system, the internet numbering system, the protocol system, the small cores of what needs to be unique and agreed upon to make the internet function. They were looking to build something that could take control and give it to the builders and the users. And so they set up or looked to people to set up a corporation that was not a standard corporation just held for private profit or even for shareholder profit, but for stakeholder benefit. And who are the stakeholders in the internet? Well, it's the people who construct it, the people who construct technologies that use it, the people who build businesses on top of it, and really importantly, the people who use it, the individuals whose only connection to the internet in 1999 might have been they had an email address and could communicate with one another, or they had just gotten to college and they found that they could browse this new web thing. Maybe they could even build a blog and publish, but all of them were somehow stakeholders in the internet, and we needed to find a way for their voices to matter, along with the burgeoning Googles and the those who had amassed a little bit of power in selling things online or selling networking technology. And how do you balance out all of those different kinds of stake? Well, it starts to get complex in building up different classes of stakeholders, different groups whose interests need to be balanced against one another. So it's not enough to say that the votes, a numerical counting of votes will win. You need to find ways that the votes from different geographies can be balanced, so that the people from North America aren't always the winners because they were the first ones to the technology, or that the people from Asia are always the winners because they have the most people who can be connected to the internet. But how do you balance those interests so that there's a room for the developing countries to show how they want their technology to develop, and room for people to compromise? And so the multi-stakeholder system is trying to engineer space for compromise and space for consensus, where just having the most power right now doesn't mean that you'll always win. You need to convince others and sometimes be convinced by them. And the complex policy development processes that ICANN has are efforts to bring in these interlocking interests, importantly, to help people recognize that their interests are interlocking and not just, run roughshod over somebody else because you can right now. And build, stable structures that other people are willing to recognize as legitimate. So for all of its grinding of gears and the slowness of its process, I think there's a lot to recommend this multi-stakeholder model, and the bottom-up and top-down nature, as they like to say, that it's building on existing communities and giving them a structure in which to influence the policy making. And as we look to AI policy, we have different sets of stakeholders, but it's equally important that we figure out how individuals, how civil society organizations, how educators, how scientists, and how commercial and government actors will be represented in those processes.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you said is about, there was a long time frame to figure these things out. And Jim earlier said how quickly in the AI world, the communities, the code and the deployments are going so fast. So maybe, some thoughts on that. You can't slow things down, but you still need to give breathing room to make these decisions and to bring into the right people into the room.
Yeah, and so you need to figure out what needs to be decided in a way that the decision matters, and what needs to be decided just to have a point of consensus. There are lots of standards processes where the discussion of technology can get bogged down in everyone's got their favorite, but much more important is that they converge on one, and that there's a meeting place. And some of those things can be made to go faster, better than core discussions of policy, where you need to get people together to agree on fundamental foundational principles, some of those things can't be rushed. You need an agreement on the underlying priority of, the human agency, and need to get there fast enough to matter, but not run roughshod over the individual contribution.
Yeah, and like Jim said, we always are very hopeful here at the Linux Foundation across all of our different projects. But there's certainly, if you look around the world, there's a lot of stress and a lot of different ways that systems are operating, or organizations, worldwide organization. So if you look out here in the room today, like what are some of the key things that people, when they leave the Human Agency, the summit today, should take into their own community? Should take into their companies that they're working with, the boards that they're advising, et cetera. Some of the key things that we should be keeping top of mind.
Well, I think the core role of the human is what all of us are here for, and I think, how many of you have thought, well, wouldn't it be great to just ignore standards, processes, and governance because we can just vibe code it all? At least a few of you. And there are plenty of places where these new tools will help us to get to a piece of the work more quickly, but we can't rush into the asymmetry of getting overwhelmed by computer-aided, LLM-generated output and forgetting the human voices in the room. So how do we scale humanity? I think we scale it through community building, and one of the core ideas of the First Person Project is to give people tools for asserting their humanity in context, in relationships, in communities, and using those communities to build toward ideas of governance and toward collective action. Because, we can do things individually, we can do things augmented by code, we can do even more things even better augmented by our communities working collectively on code and on the rules to govern ourselves by.
Wonderful. So the human's at the center, and we take a look at how we've built in the past and build better for the future. So Wendy, thank you for your time and for sharing some of that with us.
Thanks so much for listening.